Tate Chronicles now transmitting.
Welcome to the Tate Chronicles on Healthcare Now Radio. And now, here's your host, Jim Tate.
Good day, citizens of the free world, from border to border, coast to coast, and to all the ships at sea. I bring a warm welcome. This is your correspondent, Jim Tate, and thank you for tuning in to the Tate Chronicles. Join me as we cut through the fog that exists at the leading edge of healthcare technology. My guest today is none other than John League of the Advisory Board. John leads Advisory Board's research on digital health and transformation, including topics like digital strategy, telehealth, artificial intelligence, and digital equity. The Advisory Board is a well-known leading-edge consultancy in the business of pushing healthcare forward. John, welcome to the Tate Chronicles.
Thanks, Jim. Great to be here.
There's quite a bit of uncertainty about where healthcare organizations should invest now in terms of technology. The decisions have to be made of what's of value. Is the technology needed? Will it become quickly outdated? So I think it's important, John, to take a step back and understand where we are. The challenges that are presented bring opportunities if we can find them. And so the primary question I hope that we can address somewhat today is what is actually happening in digital health. That's a big topic. We're going to cover it in about 25 minutes the best we can. And so the first thing I'll put out there, John, is that everyone continues to invest in digital health, despite these doomsday forecasts for startups and naysayers about efficacy. And, there have been things along the road where we hear this is going to be the next thing. Purchasers and users of digital health keep hearing, well, we finally got it solved. 3 years ago, blockchain was going to solve everything. Well, it solves some things, but it doesn't solve everything. So I think a lot of folks are a little bit gun-shy about new technology. But with all this uncertainty, I bet you kind of sense there's an opportunity there in some of these new things that might be really of value.
I think that's right, Jim. I think there are a lot of orgs that are gun-shy. I think especially on the provider side, everybody is still traumatized, right, by their EHR implementation in a lot of ways. A lot of promises that didn't really work out the way we thought they would. A lot of goodwill expended with the leaders we need, certainly our clinicians, about what this would mean for them and how it would impact their ability to care for patients. And I think when you look at that, and then you look at the enormous sort of overnight transformation that we saw 3 years ago when COVID hit, around being able to communicate remotely, to deliver care remotely, to observe patients remotely, and the sort of digestion of all of that sudden change in the couple years since, I think folks have a real aversion to making a bet on anything that is not proven. And the reality for a lot of organizations is they just cannot afford to make a bad choice. So on the provider side, you've got, organizations with little to no margin. They've got to do, I was talking to one org last week, was saying that, if they wanted to do the kind of virtual care that they think their market would absorb, they need to do $10 million in Wi-Fi upgrades just to their own facilities. That's not new technology. That's not, anything that is responsible for, the front edge of the patient clinician interaction. That's just like, we got to get our systems to be good enough to handle the traffic. When you look at payers and you look at what employers are looking for, they are not in a position where they are going to throw money at something that they are not absolutely sure will either reduce costs or improve adherence. So, the sort of Wild West, I guess, that we had a couple years ago is really not what is happening now. And I think there is a lot of hesitation. Now, I say all that as sort of, doom and gloom, which you just said, we probably shouldn't talk about so much. But I do think that is the reality of where people are starting. At the same time, these very same people that I talked to, even the org that was talking about the $10 million in Wi-Fi upgrades they need to do, they are absolutely convinced that digital health, and I don't mean like apps and gadgets and new stuff like that. I'm thinking bigger here, digital
Sure.
health in terms of like delivering care digitally and improving that process. That digital health is coming, that they do need to develop these capabilities. They do need to understand how to engage patients, how to get clinicians to use them, how to drive efficacy, how to drive down costs. They do believe that all this is coming. And if you look at the big orgs, if you look at UHG, if you look at CVS, if you look at Amazon, certainly, they are all out there in the world investing heavily in digital health and digital interactions as they, sort of build out their new empires. I think the ground level understanding of what we need to do is running up against the reality of the financial and the strategic positions that many orgs find themselves in.
If we hear so many, of course, we probably don't hear a lot about good implementations. We mainly hear about when there's a problem. And if I was the chief financial officer of a large healthcare organization, I've obviously heard stories about major implementations of EHR systems, health information systems that cost hundreds of millions of dollars, are never successfully implemented, and bring financial risk to the organization. If that happens, that's kind of a career ender to a CFO or CIO. And I think there's bound to be fear out there because just the numbers that are involved that affect the financial health of an organization. So,
oh yeah,
go ahead.
Absolutely. When you think about an organization that doesn't have a lot of margin, they've only got, I don't know, if you got a 1% margin on a $4 billion healthcare organization, that's $40 million. And that's $40 million to invest in everything. That's not just digital health. That's also like, can we pay our clinicians more? Do we need to repave the parking lot? It's not just is this technology going to work? It is also the opportunity cost of not doing everything else. And I think that raises the stakes for what we need to be investing in. And so I think that has made a lot of organizations, I wouldn't say skeptical of the technology. I think it is more about they want to be as certain as possible about what they're gonna invest in. And the challenge, that the way we see that play out is we did a survey last year about artificial intelligence, right? What are health systems doing with artificial intelligence? We got a lot of good information, but I think the thing that struck me most, Jim, was we had done this same survey in 2018, so well before COVID, well before the economy started, being weird and inflation and all of that stuff. And what we found was about 60% of orgs said they had a positive view of artificial intelligence. So they either said AI is going to be transformative for what we do, or we will definitely get incremental value out of it. And it was about 40% overall who said it was going to be transformational. When we asked that same question at the beginning of 2022, we still had that 60% who had the positive view, but the breakdown of that had flipped. 40% said it was going to be incremental value, and only 20% said it was going to be transformative. That had totally shifted. And I think that just reflects sort of the mindset of, hey, we know we need to do this, but we are not counting on this to be fairy dust that's going to fix all of our problems and sprinkle it through the system.
Exactly. And, the whole thing about artificial intelligence, except for the rocket scientists and computer scientists and those deeply involved with AI, and somebody can tell us how it affects healthcare, and we say, well, I guess I see the benefits there. But then the whole concept of AI becoming somewhat viral with the launch of Chat GPT, where all of a sudden a gigantic number of people see what AI can do, not necessarily in healthcare, but just AI in general. They start to understand how transformative it can be. You know, there's great potential. It's not like blockchain where we saw that possibly is going to be the silver bullet for everything. I'm really excited to see what AI does in healthcare.
I think so too.
And the people who are on the leading edge creating things, I can't wait to see where it goes. I think that's great, fascinating potential.
I agree completely. I think the challenge is we got to think big enough for something like generative AI, while we also understand and honestly, Jim, respect the limitations that it has right now. And I think that sort of threading the needle is going to be key to finding use cases where it's actually valuable and not just a waste of money or scary.
John, there's that saying that those that commit themselves to the leading edge of technology will be sacrificed upon it. And so, you want to see real use cases and real benefit there. Well, let me move on to something else. We've got these rapidly emerging standards and processes in healthcare, especially around interoperability. We've got PEFCA that's finally beginning to get some traction for healthcare interoperability. But there's also the question of what's known as the digital gap. So the digital gap is certainly growing right now. And so this almost forces an opportunity around addressing some of these issues around digital inequity. Love to hear your comments on that.
Sure. And, I think you're absolutely right. I think when we think about the way organizations and customers look different now versus how they did in say 2019, all of the work and all of the experience that everybody had in 2020 and 2021, being remote, accessing things remotely, doing everything on their phone, getting everything delivered or in an Amazon box, making sure that those experiences were as easy as possible. I think that has really raised the bar and sort of the expectation for consumers. And I want to call out here, let's not forget that when patients are not in the hospital, they are consumers, but so are clinicians. Same sort of thing. And when you think about the kind of digital experience that those folks have in every other interaction they have throughout their day with every other industry, it is probably a superior experience to what they have with healthcare. And so the training, I guess you would say, that they have gotten on how to interact digitally has really sort of exacerbated, I think, their disappointment in what healthcare is able to offer for them in terms of access and convenience. Now, part of that is, honestly, Jim, most of our systems aren't designed for easy access. We don't have universal online scheduling. We can't figure out how much it's going to cost to go to the doctor before we go in. You got to get a referral for everything. There's prior auth, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the pressure that a lot of consumer expectations are going to start putting on healthcare is also starting to be reflected in what employers are looking for. I saw a survey the other day that said, only about 20% of employers feel like their employees have easy enough access to healthcare, despite the enormous amounts that these employers are paying. That's not a situation that can continue. I think we're going to have to think about, how do we up our game in healthcare? And it doesn't have to be on the bleeding edge of adaptive, responsive, sort of immersive experiences. There was a class survey at the beginning of 2022 that said, hey, the most important part of the patient experience is for the patient being able to contact their clinician either before or after the visit. Like that really matters to them in terms of their satisfaction with the whole experience. It is also the very hardest thing for them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not complicated. I mean, we've got any number of technologies that could do that. We just don't use them.
If you're just joining this episode, I'm Jim Tate, and today on the Tate Chronicles, I'm speaking with none other than John League of the Advisory Board. And the question of the day is, what is actually happening in digital health? John, I'd like to move on to something else I hope you can find an opportunity for me in. That is that the issue of how technology can actually benefit clinicians. And I guess one example I can give is the nursing shortage we have that's going on. That was certainly, we show an incredible shortage. There's a chronic shortage, but there's an acute shortage during the COVID pandemic. Travel nurses were being paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, sometimes up to $400,000 a year, to travel to an area that didn't have enough nurses. And it was really a supply and demand thing. And so how can we make sure that there's technology that can support healthcare, but free up providers and nurses to do what only they can do that technology cannot do?
I think like so much of what's going on is about a mindset shift, Jim. Like, the technologies that we have work when they are deployed appropriately. Mm. And they are cheaper now and faster now than they've ever been relative to the same capabilities and what they would have cost in the past. And that's about manufacturing, and that's about cloud, and that's about efficiency and Moore's law and all of that kind of stuff.
Sure.
But I think the big thing about the technologies that we need to support our clinicians, it's largely around a mindset. And so let me show you two examples of what I mean by that.
Great.
One is that we are so focused on productivity when we think about how can we support clinicians. And because of that, and that's true whether we're talking about, RVUs or visit length or scheduling or throughput in the acute care space. Those are all of the ways that healthcare tends to think about that. And it's all about productivity. But because of that, what we do is we focus on the things that drive revenue. And because of that, we focus on the physician, because the physician is the productivity engine, and their capacity to see patients and perform procedures is how these organizations get paid. And because of that, most of the focus of all of this technology is centered on the physician. And that is not necessarily wrong. I'm not saying that's bad. Certainly, doctors need all the help they can get, especially in making the clinician-patient interaction better for both of them experience-wise, but also more effective from a clinical decision-making standpoint. So anything we can do in that regard, whether that is ambient documentation or scribing or, in-the-moment clinical decision support, anything like that, provider engagement on the plan side, I think all of those things are valuable. The downstream consequence of that, though, is that nurses are only benefiting if it trickles down off of what the physicians are doing. And so the second thing I would say is we have to figure out what are the ways we can actually support nurses to be able to do the work that only they can do, because largely they're invisible. All of the things that the nurse is responsible for in the record, like usually all cascade down from what the physician does. We're not actually trying to address any of those things. There are lots of solutions that we can put in place. I think the bigger thing is, how do we recognize and how do we value what the nurse is bringing to the entire experience and delivery of care that will acknowledge both the unique, often hands-on challenges that the nurses are bringing, but also not look at them as just sort of a disposable widget that we just plug in and they execute on whatever the doctor said. And I think when we think about how technology can support them, we really need to have a different mindset. It can't just be this trickle down thing, and that whatever helps the doctor will also help the nurse. And it can't also be simply about removing a clerical or a secretarial or a librarian kind of activity that nurses so often do. Because I tell you what, if we don't change our mindset, what's going to happen when we take away one clerical responsibility from the nurses is that we're probably just going to give them another different one. And that's not going to save anybody time.
No,
make anybody less burned out.
Yeah, that's totally true. And, I would imagine, John, that the advisory boards work as in a consultant capacity, where you work with so many technology vendors and work with so many providers, and obviously have seen a lot of best practice and worst practices and lessons learned. That whole idea of the relationship between the technology vendors and the healthcare customers is pretty difficult. And so using a consultancy like, the advisory board kind of helps ease and removes a lot of the friction of those two groups, the vendors and the healthcare recipients of that technology, to actually work together to a better outcome.
Well, I think the part of the challenge, Jim, is honestly like acknowledging the friction is even there. Everybody gets in a room and, they want to sell, and there's a need
Sure.
that the customer has, and they want to buy, and they're, oh, yes, of course, we're aligned. We want to support our clinicians to, be less burned out and be more productive. We want to have a better patient experience. But like at the end of the day, nobody is really talking about like, hey, the vendor, these guys have a quarterly number that they have to hit. They've got to sell. They've got to satisfy their investors. Their CEO needs to show that there is like they can sell this product and that there's runway and that the investors will, hold on and continue to invest more. The hospital, the care provider, the plan often is also trying to figure out how to hit some sort of goal, but there's usually also some bigger story about a specific need or pain point that is not completely, transparent to the other side. I think a lot of it is these two parties have to stop talking past each other. There's way too much assuming that the other person is going to act exactly in the way that you think they are, or that you are hiring the other side to do something for you that you haven't actually spelled out. Usually on the customer side, it's about we're hiring the vendor, and what we really want them to do is like manage all the change management and deal with all like the shadow IT departments that live in all of these other spaces.
Sure.
And those kinds of conflicts are the things that make these projects take so long and really make everybody unhappy. I'm sure there are a lot of great success stories, partnerships between vendors and customers, but largely when we talk to these organizations, the story is mostly about frustration. I think largely it comes from not understanding what are the behaviors and the incentives that are driving the person on the other side of the table.
In my own work, in my own business, John, the biggest challenge comes from setting expectations. Because it is often it's not a right or wrong. It's just somebody's expecting something, and the other side doesn't know there's an expectation there. Or, there's just things are assumed. Expectations are assumed. We've only got a couple more minutes, and I want to talk a little bit about the advisory board. We've got this giant conference, the VIVE conference, which is coming up in Nashville, Tennessee, March 26th through 29th. I'm going to go be there. And I imagine you're going to be there, John. And the advisory board is going to be there and I guess meeting with folks and outlining how they can help.
Absolutely. I'll be there with several of my colleagues. We've got some folks who are going to be speaking at VIVE, largely focusing on the work that we've done around health equity. Specifically, there's a digital equity component there that we'll talk about. But I'll be around. Glad to meet anybody who wants to come talk. I'm certainly going to be glad to meet Jim in person. The thing that we are really working on at Advisory Board is both helping folks understand what's going on in the market, but then also helping organizations make better decisions about that. And I think that is where we are really trying to differentiate. There are a lot of orgs that can tell you what the deal count is and who did this and who bought what, and, you know, basically regurgitate an HBR article about the 4 things you need to do. What we're trying to do is help you make a better choice, both for your organization and certainly for your patients and your members. So I think, you know, I would love to talk to you about that. We're going to be in the Live at Vive session on Monday afternoon. That's where our folks will be speaking. If you've got, that'll be, I think, at 2 p.m. Central there in Nashville. If you want more information, advisory.com/VIVE 2023. Again, John League, look for me. I will be the bald guy in the brightly colored sport coat.
That's great, John. It'll be easy for me to find you and for anybody else. And of course, just outside of Vive, listeners can find out more about the services provided by the advisory board at advisory.com. To our audience, thanks for joining me on this episode of the Tate Chronicles. I offer a special salute to my guest today, John League of the advisory board. John, thanks for coming aboard today.
It was a pleasure, Jim. Thanks for having me.
You can find more information on this show's program page at healthcarenowradio.com. Until we meet again, here's wishing you smooth sailing and safe harbors.
Tate Chronicles transmission ending now.